Ellen DeGeneres made a mistake, but here's how we can forgive her. And I want to make clear first that I'm not judging her choice of friends in George W. Bush. I'm not going to judge anyone, let alone a gay woman, for her choices. She's entitled, and we should support her right to make those choices. But we are allowed to examine the reasoning behind those choices when she tells us we should all follow suit. Her central argument is that A, it's okay to have friends you disagree with, and B, it's important to be kind to everyone. So let's focus primarily on her ideas around kindness and compassion. I'm a big supporter of compassion, especially towards those who have done the worst things. Who needs it more? So compassion is good, but if it's reserved for powerful people who happen to be near us, that's not compassionate toward their victims. That's what I call proximity empathy. Extending compassion based on the happenstance of your closeness or familiarity with someone else's circumstances, rather than extrapolating in the abstract to everyone, including people you don't know and will never meet. And yes, we should forgive people. As with compassion, forgiveness is good. But forgiveness comes after repentance. Has George Bush ever said sorry about LGBTQ people, or Iraq, or Katrina, or 9/11, or Wall Street, or anything? Anyone should be welcomed back in polite society, but not if they're current active defenders of wrongdoing. And Bush, we should remember, worked hard to help get Brett Kavanaugh on the Supreme Court. It's probably easier for Bush to do stuff like that the more cover he gets in polite society. I do not mean entitled to what they once had. And if they don't repent of their wrongdoing, and when those who follow them in power refuse to use the law and other levers of power to hold them accountable, then that obligation falls on us. When our systemic norms fail us, we are obliged to use the social norms that we actually still have control over. That is kindness towards people we do not know and will never meet. Why? Because those doing wrong now are paying attention to how we treat past wrongdoers. And it's easy for them to pay attention because those past wrongdoers enjoy lucrative careers on TV as public speakers or authors, as non-incarcerated people. It is unkind to their victims and to future victims to display performative kindness to past wrongdoers now. Because it's not just being kind to people who think differently, as DeGeneres said, it's being kind to people who act on those different beliefs, who impose them on others. Bush didn't just condemn LGBTQ people, he actively made their lives worse. He didn't just have the opinion that Saddam Hussein was bad, he got hundreds of thousands of people killed because he decided to do something about his opinion. And even if we accept this maximalist view of kindness and respect for those with whom we differ, it matters who we extend those things to. Who do you choose to show mercy and forgiveness to? Those are good impulses, but we're not obliged to exercise them with the rich and powerful. How about extending them to the poor and powerless? And I know Ellen DeGeneres does do that sometimes, and that's good, but all the time would be a lot better. And never doing it to the rich and powerful who have done wrong and failed to repent it would be best of all. Hell, if you really believe that we should show compassion toward everyone, go hug a child rapist on national TV. That would be putting everything on the line in defense of universal kindness. And whoever you're embracing, literally or metaphorically, if you do it because they happen to be in the same room with you, that's not kindness either. That's proximity empathy at best. At worst, it's you wanting to avoid the discomfort and disapproval that come with violating social norms. That's being unkind to the people who will see it, who don't have the option or privilege of making the choice you have of how to treat the wrongdoers. If you really want to be kind to the abstract people, the invisible ones out there who are watching you. People who lost someone in Iraq, during Katrina, on 9/11, whose civil rights and social standing suffered due to their sexual orientation, whose reproductive rights were diminished, who lost their homes or livelihoods in the Wall Street mortgage crisis, and then had to watch you chum around with and defend the person responsible as merely someone you disagree with, as opposed to someone who did something to other people. And I want to reemphasize that I do endorse the value and urgency of compassion and kindness, even to the point where I can sympathize with Ellen DeGeneres, whose gender has caused discrimination against her, whose sexual orientation nearly cost her all her fame and success. She was cast out of that world once, so I can sympathize with her desire not to cast out others. I think anyone should be able to forgive her for that, if she's ever sorry for it. Okay, so that was my attempt at fake telepromptering myself. Here's your fake teleprompter. And I saw a flurry of stuff going by in the chat box, so let's get right to it. Let's see here. What have folks got to say? DLJ says, evening all. James Harris says, I've already liked your vid, Jonathan. Don't disappoint. Well, that's pressure, man. That's pressure. See, now, if we hold powerful, influential people such as myself accountable like that, then we're on a better path, I think. Caranola says, hey, Jonathan. Hey, Caranola. James Harris says, wishing you luck. I assume that's a reference to the prompter thing. I will say that back a long time ago, I was a producer at ABC News on the overnight show and did 2 taped commentaries where I read off prompter, and I was terrible. I was so terrible. And I know this because I was the producer of the show, and I was like, that guy's never coming on our air again. And I am so glad I forgot about that before trying it again today, because I think I did a little bit better. Mr. Elder says, you aren't interesting enough for people to show up. Fake news, MAGA, LOL. How are you this morning? I'm good. I'm not sure what you meant by that, or if it's an insult or not, but okay. Jessica says, Ellen is right. So Jessica, let me know what you think she was right about and why, right? Let's have that conversation. I'd like to hear that, because I like I said, I do agree with the basic impulses, but I think that it elides the question of the non-present people who also deserve kindness, and I would argue need it more. Kindness is a finite resource. To whom we extend it and how we extend it, those are limited. So the choices we make around those decisions about how and to whom to extend it, that matters. Caranola says, don't you think she deliberately put herself in public with Bush, either by her own design or her agents? So I try not to speculate about whether people meant to do this or why, all that kind of thing. My guess is she didn't give it a lot of thought. This is the world she operates in. Jerry Jones's daughter, right, the owner of the Dallas Cowboys, calls her up and says, hey, you want tickets to the fancy suite? Sure, what the hell, why not? That's called Tuesday, right, in rich people land. And look, you know, in my career, I've been close enough to every once in a while enjoy that kind of thing. Like, oh, we've got tickets to the U.S. Open, awesome. So I've benefited from that, and it's possible that I've also, kept my mouth shut around odious people, just to avoid rocking the boat. What I wouldn't do afterwards is defend that. I would say, yeah, that was that was a small act of cowardice on my part. Guilty as charged. Maybe even I'm sorry. Although it might, if I'm being honest, I might say, yeah, I would have to do it again just to preserve my social standing, and go ahead and judge me for it. But the bigger point I wanted to make here was that I've also been in proximity to people who enjoy it as a matter of course. It happens all the time. It's like that line that, like, rich people never carry cash because they don't need to. It doesn't even occur to them that they would be asked to pay for it, whether it's on the house or whether one of their entourage picks up the tab. Mr. Elder says, Ellen is right. Well, on that forgiveness she is, but not for Bush. He is a war criminal and she shouldn't have been being buddy-buddy with him. William James says, if we can't be nice to war criminals, then who can we be nice to? So I know you're being ironic, William, but I think we should be nice to war criminals. I think the left grapples with this inequity of justice sometimes, right? Where when we see rich, white, powerful people being spared, we demand that the punitive suffering rise to the level experienced by the non-privileged. And it seems to me the correct approach should be, let's stop punishing everyone else. If we recognize that certain people in certain circumstances do deserve this mercy, let's start extending that mercy to the people we don't know, whose circumstances we're not familiar with. These people are the beneficiaries of what I refer to as proximity empathy, right? The remedy for proximity empathy is not to eliminate empathy entirely. It's to eliminate the proximity requirement for it and start being able to abstract the quality of mercy and not applying it only to those people we know, and start assuming the best of the people we don't know, right? We have this horrible human instinct to assume the worst of and fear the people with whom we're not familiar, whose worlds feel furthest away from ours. And so we need more mercy, not equitable lack of mercy. Harumph. William James says, Ellen is a multimillionaire. She hangs out with elites. Elites only care in public. They all laugh at the poor people at their cocktail parties and their private suites. I would disagree with that. I've met some of these people, and some of these people are out there, saying that they should pay more in taxes and all of that. So I don't think it's a helpful strategy to sort of demonize all of them as being callous. Although, to your point, there have been studies, right, that show that the more money, the more power you have, the less able you are to empathize and to sympathize. So broadly speaking, there's truth in what you're saying, but I think to apply it universally means we make a potentially bad mistake of missing the people to whom it does not apply and understanding why that is. Caranola says, kind of like Dave Chappelle deliberately doing jokes he wanted to do regardless of what his audiences think is funny. Caranola says, good points, John. Thank you. David Brashure, I hope I'm saying that correctly, says, I disagree with her choice, but that is her mistake. His mistake is being evil. I will forgive her, but not him. So I guess I tend to think that forgiveness, we ought to try, we ought to struggle, we ought to work to extend forgiveness to those who ask for it. And if you're not asking for it, whether you're a war criminal or a TV show host, then I'm not sure it makes sense to forgive them, because now you're saying it's okay to continue doing it. You're endorsing its current and future iterations as well. And that's unkind, again, to the people who will pay the price for that. James Harris says, true in life, the Christian Bible, NT, New Testament, word that often gets translated into English as repent is metanoia, which should be translated, I'm guessing we're translating from the Greek, I don't know, which should be translated into modern English as change your way of thinking. Yeah, I like that. I like that little tidbit, James. Thank you for that. Yeah, and to change your way of thinking does suggest that you recognize that you were thinking in a less than ideal way before. And look, when you talk about forgiveness, usually that's supposed to come with more than, right? In court, it's allocution. In parenting, it's telling your kid, you don't just say sorry, you say what you are sorry for. So it would be nice to get not just, sorries, but here's why it was wrong, and here's why I did it. Here's the mistake I made. The analogy I like to use for this is, let's say you find out a friend of yours robbed a bank. You wouldn't say to your friend, what are you, evil? You would say, what are you, stupid? What are you, crazy? We assume instinctively that they have made a processing error rather than they have sat down, grown a curly mustache, and decided to become Snidely Whiplash and do evil things. We assume that they have made a mistake in how they look at the world and how they think about what is the optimal course of action to take. And so when we ask someone to repent, or when we ask that they walk through, that they talk through exactly what that change your way of thinking consists of, we usually want to hear, what was the mistake you made, right? And that can be anything from, I was scared, right? I would love to hear someone from the Bush administration say, after 2 planes crashed into the World Trade Center in New York, and 1 plane crashed into the Pentagon, and another plane was headed for my office until a bunch of brave people forced it down over Shanksville into Shanksville, Pennsylvania. And so I was scared. And so I was so scared, not just of my own mortality, but of being responsible for those deaths and for future deaths. I was so scared that I did something stupid and I said, I'm going to eradicate all evil. And that was dumb. And it arose out of my panic and my fear, and I am sorry. That to me is a real apology. And that, I think, I don't know about you, I would have to work towards accepting that apology, but I would want to do that work, and I would want to think that I would be capable of succeeding at it. Jessica says, I think it's wrong to put forgiveness expectations on other people. Just because one person doesn't move on and forgive doesn't mean the next shouldn't, and we shouldn't attack them for forgiving. Yeah, I'm not sure I did that, but if I did, I hope you'll forgive me. When you say forgiveness expectations, here's what I would say, I guess. I think I'm espousing general principles, but if you lost someone in Iraq and you never forgive George Bush, no matter what he does, you're entitled to that, and I support that choice. Same, just like I said at the beginning of my little commentary. In fact, I have it on paper so I can prove it. I'm not judging Ellen DeGeneres for being friends with the man. What I'm doing is questioning the defense she gave of it, not on her own behalf, but as a sort of universal proclamation of how we should all be, right? And that's sort of being, that's how it's being received. It's being received as this like recipe for how we get America back. That's horseshit. It's horseshit because forgiving people who are doing bad things is not going to stop them, and it's not kind to the people who will suffer for that. If you've ever been a parent, you've had this conversation in your head more than once that the right thing to do is not always the immediate, impermanent, nicest thing right now, right? This isn't an argument for tough love. You shouldn't hate your kids. That's all horseshit. But giving your kids what they say they want in the moment, that's not kindness either. That's short-term proximity empathy for the person you're dealing with right now, without regard to the potential consequences for their future selves or the people around them. Let's see. Caranola says, lots of tweeters saying about how about if Ellen went to a game with Bush after suffering the loss of a close relative in that Iraq war. Well, again, I would say you're allowed to do what you want, and you can even explain, here's why I did it. But if you're going to espouse it as a principle for how we should all act, then now we're all allowed to judge it, right? Now we're all allowed to pick apart the reasoning behind it and the logic and the consequences of it. So, you know, I'm sure there are people, literally are people, who lost someone in Iraq and then went to a game of some kind with George W. Bush. I'm 95% positive that 2 minutes on Google would pop that person up. And that's okay. You're allowed to do that. I mean, I would extend compassion even more to that person, right? I don't want to judge how anyone acts under normal circumstances. So certainly not if you're also operating under the burden of that loss and that grief. That to me renders you more immune from my judgment, right? And I would hope that I would refrain from judging that person's individual actions, but again, not if they then go on national TV and say, here's why I did it and what you should take away from it and how all of you are messed up, and it's not me, I've got it right. You all need to practice your kindness exactly the way I think it should be practiced. That came off a little bit more harsh than I meant to as a sort of representation of what Ellen said. So Ellen, if you're watching, I assume you are, I apologize for that. William James says it's about accountability. America seems to have amnesia every few years. I agree, and it's not kind and it's not unifying, right? If history teaches us anything, it's that letting Nixon off the hook hell, letting the South off the hook, right? So many of the things that we continue to struggle with are the results of a sort of, lazy is the wrong word, but an improperly executed mercy or forgiveness, right? There were ways to be merciful to the South after the Civil War. There were ways to be merciful to Richard Nixon after Watergate, after he resigned. But just lack of consequences, lack of reckoning, lack of you saying, I screwed up and here's why, we're still paying the price for that. That wasn't kindness to them. That was cruelty towards all of us and our kids. Caranola says, teleprompters are hard. They are, right? It's weird. It's just a weird thing. And like, I have a natural suspicion of anyone who performs well on camera. There's just, to me, there's something like, I don't know, something going on there. So it's sort of a point of pride that I'm not very good at it. Let's see what else you folks are saying. Mr. Elder clarifies he was joking. Thank you for that. Lauren says, I get why Ellen did what she did, but she deserves the criticism. And again, just like I wouldn't want to, thank you for sharing that, Lauren. I wouldn't want to judge her for making that individual choice in that moment, but I also wouldn't do what she did and minimize the people who criticized her for it. I wouldn't want to judge them for it either. In fact, I would want to defend them. She said something like, people did what they do when they get angry. They tweet about it, which I thought was a little condescending and minimizing real pain from real people who were suffering because of her choice and what she meant to them. It wasn't just, if Ellen DeGeneres wasn't on your radar, you weren't going to care about this. The people who felt angry or hurt or betrayed were probably people who have looked up to Ellen DeGeneres, who have thought well of her, and certainly I'm one of those people. I'm still one of those people, and so I could see why she would be hurt by their criticism, but I would also think that would inform her thinking to know that these were people who were coming from a place of good faith, rather than just dismiss them as they got angry so they tweeted. Well, it wasn't just tweeting. I'm sure people were talking about it too, right? They had human interactions with other humans about this. The fact that you, Ellen, reduce it to tweeting is just a function of the fact that you only saw it on Twitter, which means you didn't hear it face to face from anyone else. And by the way, that's probably a problem too, right? That probably means that you don't have anyone in your life who's telling you, you know what? Here's an argument you might want to consider for why this might not be a good idea. And that could be through no fault of your own that there's no one around you who does that. That's a classic dynamic of human nature that I've seen happen with any number of people who are big people. Not necessarily saying that you did something wrong there, but being famous and being powerful comes with an unspoken responsibility to ensure that does not happen. It's not enough to just passively let that dynamic play out around you. You should do the work of ensuring that there is someone in your circle who's going to be the fart in the astronaut suit and tell you, "Meh, not so much, Ellen." So my point being, if the only place she saw pushback was on Twitter, that's not a reflection on the pushback. It's a reflection on the life that she has created, or I shouldn't say life, I don't want to get into her personal life, but the professional dynamic she has created. It means it's entirely free of that criticism. And that's more a reflection on her and what's going on around her than it is on humanity. Haneen A says, Ellen done a false equivalency, a war criminal to someone wearing fur. Yeah, I've seen that argument too, and I try to give analogies some leeway because that's what they are. They are analogies. They're not supposed to be exactly the same thing. She's trying to make the point about a similar dynamic being at play. But to your point, Haneen, you're right that wearing fur is not on the same it's on a spectrum as other moral problems, and I have a problem with fur. It's not on the same moral plane with one individual wearing one coat, which they may or may not have bought or whatever, and the President of the United States launching an unprecedented kind of war against a country that had not attacked us. Kid Kick 69 says, "Is it Labor Day? LOL, your beard grows in much better than mine." It's typically a mess, and I'm sure yours is just fine. And here, it looks even better now, I'm guessing. So I'm just, you're probably just not close enough to see how patchy and 14-year-old-y it is in spots. Milo Wadlin says, "Morning, good morning." Laren says, "The target of our ire should be W, who belongs in The Hague." That's I think, a really important point, which is that we tend to focus our ire on places that look to us like pressure points, right? So after 9/11, like in the aftermath of 9/11, probably more people gave time thinking about how bad George W. Bush was than about how Saddam Hussein was. Why? Because George W. Bush was seen as more movable. And that's a human instinct, it's a natural instinct, but it's important not to forget who did the bad thing here. The real wrongdoer on 9/11 was Osama bin Laden. And you're right in this circumstance that Ellen's not the wrongdoer, at least comparatively, relatively speaking, right? We're mad because she's with that guy, and that guy did a whole litany of bad things. And that's why we're having this conversation, is because all the other points of leverage that we would have been taken away from us, right? Thanks to income disparity, he can live a life utterly insulated from people who might say anything bad about him. Thanks to whatever name you want to put on the political dynamics of it, Barack Obama and the Obama Justice Department, Eric Holder, Lynch, they never went after these people. There was no accountability. And so when you take all of these other forms of accountability off the table, Ellen DeGeneres ends up feeling like our one chance, right? You're our one chance. Help us, Obi-Wan Kenobi. And so then when she doesn't do it, she, unfortunately for her, it's not fair, she ends up bearing not just all of the responsibility that should have been fulfilled or met by other mechanisms of power. Those are now all resting on her, but so is our judgment, right? And so the entire dynamic, I think, just shows us how warped our norms and our systems have become, even the fact that we're giving a second's thought to how a daytime talk show host is treating George W. Bush. That should be a footnote at best. And instead, it's a multi-day news cycle, because she was our last best hope for justice for George W. Bush. Let's see. David Brochure says, "I think the real problem is he hasn't changed his views. If he was repentant, there would be an argument for sitting with him." Yeah, I think so. Caranola says, "But John!" My friends all call me Jonathan, but I understand the necessities of shorthand, so I'll take the "but John" in the spirit with which I'm assuming it was intended. "These people's expectations got agents, advisors. They've got to know what they're getting into, or should have done it a long time ago and never gotten where she is now." There's not a lot of incentives in that world to be the person to head off a disaster. There is a lot of work, and by work I mean money. There's a lot of money to be made in dealing with PR disasters. So, and in fact, there are usually disincentives to preventing disasters. I've worked in situations where anchors got in trouble for things they said, and then the producers got in trouble for letting them say it. But the reality was, in the circumstance I'm talking about, if you went and tried to stop the anchor by arguing with them about it or by raising it to the higher ups, in the absence of provable negative consequences for letting them do it, you would be the one to get in trouble. I once got yelled at by an anchor for being too nitpicky. I shouldn't say yelled at. He was being remonstrative with me for being too nitpicky. And I said, in journalism, you get three choices, okay? You get exactly nitpicky enough, which is impossible, practically speaking. You get too nitpicky, or you get not nitpicky enough. And not nitpicky enough is really bad, okay? So really the only option you have is too nitpicky. But no one wants someone who's too nitpicky around them, right? And so that behavior literally disincentivizes criticism. Like, was I likely to be nitpicky again after the anchor who controlled the show said that to me? Well, I'm an idiot, so yes, I was, but systematically speaking, a normal person would say, don't nitpick, check, got it, moving on. That's the norm in these circumstances. Let's see. First of all, I just want to say, everyone agreeing with me in the chat box right now, excellent point. Just stellar thinking. Mr. Elder says, I won't be nice to war criminals because there are people who wake up every day and miss a loved one because of Bush. Would you be nice to Hitler? You can't have it both ways. Sorry, but it's true. I don't remember who made the rule about trying not to compare to Hitler, but let's try not to compare to Hitler. Not because it's wrong, but just because it's hard to sustain the conversation after that. And by the way, if Hitler said he was sorry, no, I'm kidding. Harleen A. says, inequity of justice doesn't just mean repressive punitive punishment for everyone. It ideally should highlight the need for rehabilitation rather than criminalization, but in reality doesn't work. I'm not sure what you're saying doesn't work there, but I would also say when we talk about rehabilitation, that sort of presupposes to me the idea that the person we're talking about has adopted a philosophical mindset to which they are wedded, and essentially is, well, you made a choice to be evil, and so we're going to have to re-educate you in the ways of non-evil, as opposed to, what are you, crazy? You made a mistake, right? And so even framing it as rehabilitation as opposed to, hey, socially speaking, you were put in shitty circumstances, given no alternate routes, right? That's one of the reasons I love The Wire, was because the TV show The Wire, was because to me it made clear that everyone was acting in what felt to them like informed best self-interest. No one was acting crazy or evil, given the dysfunctional circumstances in which they found themselves. Each individual actor, and I don't mean person who was acting, I mean each individual agent of their own autonomy within the story, made choices based on what looked like the best outcomes to them at the time. So if you want to say that I'm just blaming society, go right ahead. But there are ways to get people off of that course, to reject those ways of thinking, that don't just involve getting in their head and fixing the evilness in there, but it involves, if not fixing society around them, which by the way would be nice, it also involves teaching them how to navigate that society and giving them reason to have faith in actual roads out, actual alternate pathways. Lauren says, W deserves to be a social pariah though. Where are you? I just lost you. You guys are going faster than I can keep up with. Holy moly, look at all this stuff I haven't even got to yet. Okay, you guys are nuts. I apologize, Lauren, I lost you. KidKick69 says, Obama sucked too, but he wasn't anything compared to what Trump is. This is Trump when he has half the country against him. If it was only Trump TV, then WW3 would have started 3 times now, also sadly. I don't know, there's an interesting non-interventionist streak in Trump, which we're seeing, of course, now play out at the expense of the Kurds. News reports out this morning said that Turkey had already begun strikes in that zone in northern Syria where Kurdish forces are. Mr. Elder says, and remember, Ellen is in that rich, powerful club that you will never be in. Dave C says, not many go after Michelle Obama for being buddy-buddy with Bush. That being said, Bush should be shunned by everyone. So I would be curious to know whether, and look, I don't have a lot of appetite for going after Michelle Obama, but I would be curious to know whether she ever offered sort of a national, full-throated defense of that relationship the way Ellen did. In other words, laying out specific reasons why this is good and you should all act the same. It's one thing if, again, I wouldn't judge her if being in that very rarefied world, and I don't mean of privilege and power, I mean of like daunting responsibility, right? Let's not forget that that's probably the toughest job in the world. And Michelle Obama was obviously very close to the epicenter of that during the Obama administration. So the fact that she formed an affinity with and affection for George W. Bush, again, I'm not going to judge her for that. I would prefer there be fewer public displays of it, but those tend to come at circumstances where kind of like she can't help it, Jerry Ford's funeral or whatever. I'm making that up, but as an example, as opposed to I made a conscious choice to show up at a ball game with him and then go on my national TV show and say why every one of you who criticized me is wrong. So I would say difference of degree there in the case of Michelle Obama. Heather Vesper says, wow, so eloquently stated about mercy and perfectly summates my feelings about it. So I apologize for reading that one out loud because I didn't realize as I started that it was a compliment, and you guys know I don't do well with compliments. Thank you, Heather. I appreciate that. Karinola says, we live in an age very lacking in empathy. Ellen seems to be riding on this trend. I don't know about the age. I like to think, what's that Martin Luther King quote about the arc of the universe is long, but it bends toward justice. And without getting all the Steven Pinker critics on my butt about it, I do tend to think in general, we're getting better. And we're getting better at expanding empathy from proximity empathy, to abstract empathy. And I do think in general, we're getting better about that. And that to me is what like social justice is all about, is constantly pushing the boundaries out to people we haven't thought about, to people who we don't see, to people whose specific circumstances we might not even have considered as requiring a specific kind of empathy. So that constant expansion to me is a good thing. And again, I think the bigger danger is not so much that we're lacking in empathy, but that when we see inequities in how it's expressed, we have an impulse to want to increase the punitive measures towards the privileged rather than to continue to work on reducing punitive measures towards those who are not privileged. I'm not sure if I ended up agreeing or disagreeing with you, but I hope I represented your viewpoint fairly and accurately. Let's see what else we have here. Kid Kick 69 has some beard commentary here, so we'll take a quick digression into facial hair. Kid Kick 69, I was about to say he says, but I shouldn't assume. Says, my cheeks are way more patchy, LOL, and even though my hair is brown, my facial hair is ginger, so you have the win, haha. Well, I don't know, ginger seems a lot cooler to me than just boring old gray coming in, or silver as my wife likes to call it. William Martyr is talking about Nuremberg, so I'm going to skip that for the moment, William. And by the moment, I'm afraid I probably mean forever. Karinola says, John, the woman is a big public figure. Just go to the game with your family member and save your war criminal friends for a movie at home. Again, I wouldn't say that you're wrong. I'm just saying, me personally, I don't feel comfortable rendering that judgment. Again, it's only in the aftermath of Ellen making a case for it and attempting to universalize it and sort of narrowly defining kindness as something to be extended towards the people who happen to be in our circle as opposed to the people who are not. And I think the more powerful you are, the more of a profile and a platform you have, the more of an obligation, a moral obligation you have to do the work of imagining the people around you. I remember after 9/11, uh, um, there was a lot of chatter in online forums and message boards. That was a thing back then, and people were talking about, praying for the dead and things like that. And I made some remark about how, there is a statistically good chance that some of the dead don't believe in God and are philosophically materialistic. And and I said the people around them who lost those people, when you say that, they're going to feel unheard and unseen. And I got piled on big time. And then one person chimed in and said, this happened to me at my father's funeral or something like that. And this person said they felt exactly that way. And I didn't know that person. I just assumed, statistically speaking, that they were out there. And we need to do that work of imagining. And it works the other way too. I was on a show once where, maybe I've told this story before. If you watch long enough, you will discover that I only have about 5 stories. We were talking on a conference call about some cult that said the world was going to end on Tuesday or whatever, and everyone was talking about all the fun we could have with that. And I said there are tens of millions of people in this country who agree with that cult, with the only exception that they don't think it's going to happen Tuesday. They don't know when it's going to happen. So if we're going to make fun of the Tuesdayites, we might as well also make fun of the anytimeites. And by the way, my guess is that there are some people on this call who also believe that someday the world is going to end just like the Bible says. They're just not sure when it is. And I said that as an atheist, just because I could imagine that being the case. And sure enough, someone on the call said, that's me. So they're out there. Like, there's 7 billion people in the world. If you can imagine a person, you could probably find them on Google. Don't remember what my point is, but man, did I nail it. Amanda K says, oh, here we go, having a great conversation, and here you come in with your crap. I find it strange that you only attack small streams. Oh, this is Amanda yelling at someone. Thank you for the attempt at defending us, Amanda. I think we're okay, though. Kid Kick 69 says, we should do an interview called Cansplaining. Haha, I am Canadian and think all these radical talks are just funny. Okay. Eve Gusman says, has any person in a position of power ever apologized for their terrible judgment? I think so. I'm hard pressed to come up with examples, but I do think so. I know Obama got kicked around a lot for his apology tour, but of course that was apologizing for what other American administrations did. But I think people have said sorry for things. Did Bill Clinton ever say sorry over the Monica Lewinsky stuff or lying about it or anything like that? I don't recall. Let's see. Mr. Elder says, well, gotta go. Majority is on. Report has already started. And Sam Cedar is one of those rare professionals who is actually good at talking to camera, who I do not think, there's something about that guy. So anyone who wants to jump on over to Majority Report, consistent with my theme today, I'm not going to judge you. That's okay. Let's see. Just Bree, I think you're a newcomer, Just Bree. Is that right? I don't recall seeing you before. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. Take that, Sam Cedar. Just Bree says, it's very easy to become out of touch as you make more money. Your perspective changes. I once had a conversation with a very famous anchor before they got the show for which they are now very famous. And we were discussing this person taking on that show. And I said, they will incentivize you to be a dick, meaning bad behavior would be rewarded because there's such a put out fires mentality that you are incentivized to become a fire, right? And I basically said, so you can not become a dick, you can actually become a dick. And I apologize for the language. This was literally what I said at the time. Or you can pretend to be one and only use it as a tool when you think it is beneficial, but make sure not to actually become that person and act that way in inappropriate circumstances. And by the way, I should be clear that the word I'm using is slang for private detective. Okay, I'm referring to power structures incentivizing us all to become private detectives. Let's see, Vanilla Bean, I found you and then lost you, says Bernie Sanders is changing things. He is showing compassion to the average person for a change, unusual for someone with power. I think we're seeing more of that in general from the presidential candidates. Not all of them, certainly I'm not saying that. Caranola says, good points, Jonathan, very good. You've got empathy. So here's my confession. I have this theory, this pet little theory that certainly doesn't apply universally, but I've met and I've heard stories about some of the most repugnant right-wing folks you could imagine being actually one-on-one kind, caring, proactively interested in your welfare. Being basically modeling all the behavior that they are on air violently opposed to in the abstract. And some people put that down to them just performing on TV, but I think it's proximity empathy. It's a real empathy that they have for the person in front of them, but they imagine such bad things about the people they don't know that it feels like appropriate and justice and necessary self-care to treat those people with suspicion and recrimination and harsh measures. On the flip side, some people, all right, all the lawyers and everyone out there, you should stop watching. Some people I have worked with have advocated for extremely progressive, open-hearted, compassionate policies for everyone, but in private, they're private detectives, both in petty, small, mean ways, but also in like problematic ways, like not having the courage to stand up for what's right when it's, when it might jeopardize your career and things like that, but also just in terms of being a private detective. So I guess what I'm saying is it's very easy for me to sort of sit here and espouse universal empathy and universal compassion. I fail at it all the time. I could go upstairs right now and bring my son down here and have him tell you all of the injustices of which I'm guilty. I said a very mean thing to him just this morning. So I think it's important that we not expect ourselves to be perfect, but are aware that we're not, right? Don't flatter ourselves as, I'm an empathetic person, I'm a compassionate person. Assume we're not, right? Assume that we all have work to do, both, right? Assume that we all have work to do, both proximity and abstract empathy, right? Assume that we have work to do on both of those fronts, and I think we're liable to do better. I mean, I beat myself up this morning after speaking unkindly to my son. And hopefully that will mean that I do better next time, right? So I appreciate the kind thoughts, but I also think, in a way, that's part of the system that I was talking about earlier, right? When we see the people around us, we want to make them feel good, and so we tell them good things about themselves when we see it in them. When we see them model empathy, we say, you're an empathetic person. And then they believe it, and they walk around thinking they're empathetic. And so it's okay for me to go to the ball game with George W. Bush. I'm an empathetic person. Look, I'm being kind towards him. My own people tell me I'm empathetic. So it's tough, right? Because there are so many trade-offs between immediate kindness towards the people immediately around us and what actually fosters optimal outcomes. I can't believe there are 35 people still watching right now. You guys are nuts. Caranola informs me Clintonola will never say sorry for that crime. Oh, for the crime bill, right? Yeah, I think Joe Biden has been asked about the crime bill. I haven't heard him say, you know what, we screwed up. We gave into the implicit bias that was there in the hysteria over 70s, 80s, early 90s crime. We gave into it. We weren't self-aware. We didn't do the work of asking ourselves what's in the best interest of justice. We gave into what was politically expedient, and we screwed up. And here's why I won't do that again. Here's the work I've done to make sure that I'm not as susceptible to the external or internal forces that led me to make that mistake the last time. Haneen says, I will rewind Majority Report. Well, it is obviously now on with me and Sam Cedar. We are this now. We are now official rivals, because last week someone made fun of me for only going, I think, 28 minutes, and it's almost an hour, guys, that we've been talking, and my commentary was only like 5 minutes long. So you guys are nuts. And I'm nuts too. Let's see what we've got here. Okay, I'm scrolling through Jesuit conspiracy theory. Vanilla Bean says, that is my issue with Bernie Sanders too. I wish he would call out the DNC's corruption. It is hard to win as an independent. You have to work with the DNC. And then says that is superficial empathy. Maybe I'm mixing up some of the thoughts here. DLJ says proximity, because I've been referring to proximity empathy, meaning who we extend our empathy to. DLJ says proximity relates to both space and time. For the former, meaning for time, closeness matters to be more likely forgiven and forgotten. For the latter, distance matters to forgive and forget. I'm not exactly sure what you're saying there, but that just could be my own fuzzy-headedness. Maybe the rest of you guys are getting it. KidKick69 says, I gotta go. I skip as much work as possible to watch you. I'm gonna put that in my sticking it to the man box. Thank you. You're the best at bringing everyone into the conversation on the show. Oh, thanks. You should get a reward, as there should be more of it again. Well, I should definitely get rewards. I think we can all agree on that. But I'm not sure what you mean there should be more of it again. Do you mean bringing people in the conversation afterwards? I will try to keep that in mind. Sherry Addis says, my notification just popped up. So this is something we've had in the past, Sherry. First of all, thanks for subscribing and getting your notification. I don't know why, but YouTube doesn't seem to notify people until usually after I'm done. So what I will say is we aim for 11:30 a.m. Eastern Time live every weekday. So that's your notification for now and evermore going forward in terms of when you can join us here and be part of the conversation. 11:30 a.m. Eastern Time every weekday. Let's see. Blue Jay says, someone fill me in on what's going on. So basically what I said was, I don't want to judge Ellen DeGeneres and her choice of sitting with George W. Bush, but I did want to address what she said about how we should all think about kindness. And the bottom line point that I wanted to make was that we're allowed to extend kindness to whomever we want, but if we have a public platform, then who we choose to extend that to sends a message, and we can and should extend kindness not just to those near us, but to those that we don't know, people far from us in time and in circumstance, by not making it seem like the people who have done them wrong are fine and dandy. If you scroll back to the beginning, I said it much better at the beginning. Let's see. Amanda K says, oh wait, Amanda and William are arguing. Come on, guys. Show compassion and kindness to each other. Vanilla Bean says, Ellen DeGeneres shows superficial empathy. She still wants to rub elbows with the elite. There's a big divide between the rich and poor. There is a big divide, but there are people in it. And so very few people go instantly from rich to poor. In fact, if you look at the studies, no one goes from rich to poor, generally speaking. But my point is that it's a spectrum, and there's no point on that spectrum where someone comes to you and announces and tells you, you are now one of the rich and powerful. Here's a list of the obligations you have as a result. And they've done studies on this where they where they ask people, including people who have a shit ton of money, and by shit I mean private detective, they ask people whether or not they are rich. And, you know, people with millions of dollars routinely classify themselves as middle class. So, you know, there's a lack of, no one wants to think of themselves as the most powerful people, right? Everyone has something to gain internally by being a victim, for one thing. No one wants the obligations that come with power. They want to be able to do the things that they want to do that come with power, but they don't want to be obliged to do things that they don't want to do. Karinola says, don't know which is worse, skipping work to watch Jonathan or being up past 1:30 a.m. in Tokyo, making myself too sleepy to get up for work. Karen, are you in Tokyo and you're watching us at 1:30 in the morning? Please take, what do I say at the end of every episode? I say, take care of each other and take care of yourselves. Karen, go to bed. Honestly, I'm probably going to sign off in a minute now anyway, and you can always come back and watch it later. So please, I appreciate it. Take care of yourself. Eve Gusman says, the Majority Report is a rerun anyway. Sam is out for the holy day. Well, there you go, people. I told you from the beginning, Sam Cedar's terrible. Never watch Majority Report unless, of course, you're not watching TYTI Daily, in which case Majority Report is great and Sam is a wonderful human being. Go watch this show. Sherry Addis says, Sam talks too slow. Sam Cedar talks too slow? That's amazing. Now I'm thinking maybe I speak too fast. Because Sam's been doing radio, webcasts. He's been doing this for quite a while. So I would tend to, and of course he's been an actor as well. If you guys don't know, he's done some funny stuff on camera as voice actor as well as behind the camera. So now I've got to wonder whether maybe I talk too fast. All right, guys. If only to get Karinola to bed, I'm going to say thank you very much. Oh, wait, one more. The 720, I think you're new to us, the 720, says, I feel like a lot of people would have cheered if she said it about someone other than George Bush. You mean in terms of urging compassion towards people? Yeah, that's probably true. And like I said, you know, if you really want to make a point about showing compassion towards everyone, show it towards someone who's not in power, who has done something that everyone will viscerally recognize as an awful, awful thing, right? There are people who bipartisanly inspire disgust and revulsion much more than even George W. Bush does. So if you really want to demonstrate what universal kindness and compassion look like, they're out there. Go find them. Go book them on your show. Go do the dance. Go tell everyone to applaud, right? Because we're kind to everyone. And then we'll see. Then we'll have a different conversation about all of this. And I feel like I'm ending being mean now, but it does get me angry. This notion of using George W. Bush as the model for what maximalist compassion looks like. You can find worse people. And with that, I'm going to say thanks so much, guys. This was a lot of fun today. I always weigh whether or not to step into, you know, social, cultural commentary type stuff. People hated what I had to say about the Joker movie last week, so I try not to do it too often, but this one was just one that had me thinking a lot. So I appreciate you coming along for the ride. If you don't subscribe to TYT Investigates and you want to watch TYTI Daily every weekday at 11:30 a.m. Eastern Time, please subscribe to TYT Investigates here on YouTube. If you don't already, I hope you'll like and follow us over on Facebook. Take care of each other. Take care of yourselves. I'll see you tomorrow. Bye, guys.